Welcome to the Spirit Sessions podcast. I'm your guide, Katie Silcox, bringing you your weekly self-love soundbite. Join us where I'll help you find your true spiritual home, where every single aspect of you is holy ground, holy ground, holy ground, holy ground.
This is Spirit Session Podcast with Katie Silcox. Venga chicos, empezamos.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hi everyone, Katie here. This podcast is intended to inspire you, educate you, and most importantly, support you on your journey towards knowing who you really are, that inner self, that inner teacher. I am not a psychologist or a medical doctor and do not offer professional health or medical advice on this podcast. If you are suffering from any kind of psychological or medical issue, please do the right thing and seek help from your qualified health professional. So today's podcast is brought to you by one of my favorite companies. We've had them on the pod before, female-founded Embodied Ayurveda. They are making artisan lines of small batch, pure, organic Ayurveda products. They're making them up there in Northern California, you guys. This is the stuff that I personally use. They are handcrafted. These gals know what they're doing. They are raising consciousness through their products. Their offerings are cruelty-free, vegan, and they really do a great job at selecting herbal ingredients that are sustainable, which really matters. There's a lot of over-harvesting of these Ayurvedic herbs. So they're helping out, making sure that the plant medicine is abundant for many generations. In addition to those amazing formulations, why I love this company, their marketing is amazing. Go follow them on Instagram. It's beautiful. But also all of their stuff comes in glass bottles. Let me tell you, as a businesswoman, that is a labor of love. Their products are in glass to maintain the integrity of those herbs. They're amazing. Their stuff's printed on recycled paper stock, all the good things. So I really recommend that you get your Ayurveda products from Pavani. You will be supporting a woman, female-founded business, small business that helps you maintain your health. And their products are incredible. I use their body oils. They have an amazing coconut milk bath powder. Make sure to get some of that. And really everything. I love all of their products. So thanks, Pavani, for sponsoring this podcast. All right, everyone. Here we are on another Spirit Sessions podcast adventure. I, as you guys heard in the introduction, am here with I'll just be really honest, like probably the most important person in my life right now. And I know many of you guys have heard me speak about her over the course of several years. And I refer to her as my mentor, Crystal. And today I'm so happy and honored to have her on Spirit Sessions. She's been on the show before, but this is going to be one in a series of sessions with her that I'm sort of off the cuff calling Conversations with Crystal. It's been something that we've done together in person. We used to sit and drink coffee and look at the sun rising and have these really long conversations that later I would think, wow, the whole world, I think, really would benefit from hearing these things. And so today we're going to open that door to hopefully what will be an ongoing series of inquiries into the nature of spirit, of evolution, and really of mentorship and what that even means. So Crystal Mortensen, welcome to Spirit Sessions.
Thank you, Katie. It's really good to be here. I'm excited for our conversation too.
Yeah, I think, we were discussing before you came on, just there's so many things that we want to talk about and how to kind of open the door into a conversation that A, would be of benefit to other people, but B, kind of form an umbrella around everything we want to talk about from here on out. And what you came up with was this phrase that I think is really beautiful, and it's the healing climate. And I hope today I'll do the lesser of the talking, but I think it would be helpful to frame for everyone listening to just understand the reason that or a little bit about me and where I was coming from, and meeting you, and kind of how that opened up a lot of doors for me that that helped me on so many levels unlock places that felt almost impenetrable. And so, as many of the listeners know, I'd been in the yoga world in a tantric lineage for almost a decade, really ardent student of meditation, worked on a master's degree in Ayurveda, hardcore meditator, doing all the things, right? Like getting up early, doing hours of practice, breath work, mantras, visualizations, chants to goddesses that I could barely pronounce, and really longing with like the full fire of my heart to, now looking back, I can say I wanted so badly to fix myself. And for a while, those practices really worked, and I really believed in them. And I think they created something of a Band-Aid, and, some of them were really beautiful. And I think it honed my capacities in many ways for focus and internalization and a lot of these things. But it became really apparent to me that I wasn't, something wasn't clicking, and maybe even making certain aspects of my journey worse. And so I reached out to a friend. I knew I wanted a somatic-based therapist, and she recommended you. And I've been working with you intensively for the past, I think it's like 4 or 5 years almost. And I think the central feature of my experience of the relationship, one of the central features, is this consistency. And I was thinking, the consistency of what? And yesterday we spoke about the healing climate, and I think it's this consistency of being in relationship with someone who continues, even when it's really hard, to hold for me a compassionate space. And so, I'm like so grateful. I mean, I get really emotional talking about it, because I feel like, God, I must have some really good karma out there to have found you. But also, the work that it does require to stay in that constancy on both parts. And so I guess we could just open up the field by defining what you mean by the healing environment or climate.
Yeah. Well, I think what you just spoke about it's so often people's journey. I mean, I relate to that too, in terms of doing, being on the path, searching for healing, searching for personal growth, searching for answers, searching for, all the things. And somehow it not quite landing or coming together, where we're still left in a place where we're still on the hunt. Mm-hmm. And we're still feeling ourselves as like almost like trying to get on the path in some way, right? Like we're still like, there's this thing I'm trying to fix, or this thing I'm trying to heal, and not quite getting to it yet. And I think that's a very common experience. And I think that's both an outcome of sometimes a mismatch of what the technique or the practice and what we're wanting it to do for us. Sometimes it's that's not a match. or the sequencing isn't quite there. There's some things we need foundationally in place for those practices or tools to become more effective. But the other thing is this background feeling towards ourselves and our feeling towards our situation and our feeling of what this healing work is, the intention towards the healing work or the orientation towards it or towards ourselves is, one of, we're trying to fix ourselves and change ourselves, and we see the thing we're trying to resolve as the thing that's wrong, and the things that we're, the practices or the therapies that we're doing as the thing that's going to eradicate it or fix it, so then we can then move forward and sort of be different, be a different version of ourselves. So we always think the thing we're bringing to the work is the thing we're trying to a lot of times get rid of, and then once we get rid of it, things will be better. Yeah, will be fixed. And oftentimes the thing we're trying to fix it's actually what we are needing to open to and start to come into relationship with. And it's almost like very hard to do that when our orientation towards it is, how do we just, let's move this aside or get it resolved so we have the thing we're hoping to have, so we can then become who we're meant to be. And so there's a way that orientation is almost, it's both overlooking the opportunity in that, and it's basically how I see it is, so much of the healing is about opening that space and starting to come into relationship with that. And that's where the shift of orientation from how do we get rid of the thing, how do we become someone else, starts to reorient to coming more and more deeply into this relationship with ourselves, with what's there, with all the things. So the healing climate that we were talking about is this, in a way, a reorientation to, and you can't really, in a way, what we're describing, cultivating, is not something you can just decide to do and then, oh yeah, now I'm going to take that on, and now I'm going to be this person who feels really wonderfully towards all these really difficult things that I'm struggling with, things that I feel really bad about within myself, or would like to be different, or whatnot, right? Our idea of who we hope to be, or what we think the change is supposed to look like. That's also not
right. It's like, okay, it's therapy time. I'm now going to enter into the healing climate. That's like bonbons and roses, like the space of only loving feeling. It's one of the things I've learned with you so much is the irony of the alchemy that occurs, the paradox when you just let things be what they are.
Yeah, because the thing about, I'm going to now just be in acceptance of everything, is almost another jumping over the, what we're describing, which is this relationship with the struggle, with the, I don't want this, I don't like this, I don't want this to be true for me, I don't want this to be happening, I want my life or myself to be something other than it is. That can also show up in the orientation of, I'm like the veil of it, I'm accepting everything as a almost jumping over being in relationship with things that we're actually like facing the feelings of, and the attitude of like aversion and like aggression towards aspects of us, or towards ourselves, or towards what's happening, or what we see our life to be. So it's actually getting in relationship with that bad feeling towards ourselves that is actually really helpful in the reorientation. So the climate being not so much the taking on an attitude of all of this is great and I feel great about all of it, but taking on the openness to how much we really don't want it a lot of times.
And so much resistance.
So
So much.
yeah. Right. And then the openness to, okay, there's so much resistance here. And that's part of it too, instead of we need to stop being resistant. I mean, there's this endless way we're always to reshape and rework things, to feel a bit more palatable to us, just to make ourselves feel more palatable to ourselves. And that's this whole healing climate discussion we're having. It's not really one thing. It's this, it's a climate, it's this atmosphere of that we're like not really taking on this positive climate, but we are starting to open more and more to all of it, especially, and open to how we struggle with the relationship with ourselves.
Yeah.
And,
I was just going to say and I think it would be helpful for the listeners. Like we've sort of been talking about that cultivation of the internal climate of compassionate regard or openness, as you say, but the relationship I've had with you, I think about Carl Jung saying, I'd rather be whole than good. And you've taught me how to do that because you act as it's like for a moment, we extract a part of our consciousness and imbue the therapist with that. And you hold that for me and you show me what it looks like, you to me. And I've even said to you in sessions, I feel like you are so much more compassionate to these awful parts of me that I just resist so strongly. And you laughed and you're like, that's my job. Right. And then through time, obviously we've been working together for many years. Like I'll be sitting in the bathtub and I'll be like, WWCD, like what would Crystal do? Or what would Crystal think? And you've become sort of a fixture in my mind, which all these psychiatrists and psychologists have said, this is a good thing. We imbue the therapist with this sort of sense of morality or goodness or compassionate regard that gives me a place to go when I can't do it, because sometimes it's so hard to get out of your own pattern. And so in a way, it's like our relationship is teaching me how to love myself when you're not around.
well, I think that's the thing, that we underestimate the difficulty of the self-compassion. Like we hear about it and it sounds relatively, in a way, for some
love yourself.
Oh yeah, kind of makes sense. And yeah, so we feel that way. But when we really start to explore some of these more deeper layers of, we think about like personal honesty, it's harder than we think it's going to be. And so this, what you're describing about how the relationship allows for having a direct experience of that, it's very hard to build something inside that we don't actually have a reference point for
externally.
Yeah, like that's how we're meant to have it.
Crystal, can you speak to our audience of the way in which, I mean, this can kind of derail us, but it might be nice. Like this makes sense from a brain developmental perspective, right? Like you've said to me, Katie, you're rebuilding this part of your brain that may not have fully, right? And none of us have, right? Like we're all dealing with like not a full deck of cards, but in a way, it's in the relationship that the brain can actually rewire.
Yeah, there's definitely the interpersonal neurobiological, aspects of this that are, we think about it through the lens of attachment and development, that our brain does get wired in the field of the relationship with the other, and the caregiver being regulated and stable and being able to be open to both their own internal experience of what arises in the relationship with the child, as well as that allows the caregiver to be open to the internal experience of the child and be in relationship to that. That's the climate through which we do develop. Now, if the caregiver is unable to be in contact with their own, something within themselves, a certain feeling, a certain state, a certain memory, which is always the case, right? Unless we're fully actualized, which isn't, most of our
Parents.
Of our experience. Yeah. And most of us, right, we always are going to have some, places where we're not as fully integrated. And there's degrees of that. And so that does become the place in the caregiver where it's hard to then be open to themselves and the child. And so then the child doesn't feel the experience of that openness and the being with in that unconditionally welcoming, open, but also regulating way. And so this is what we're really talking about. Yes, there's brain development. And if we look at this from a beyond our biology perspective, which, I like to hold this in a larger frame, not just the nuts and bolts of the nervous system, but this idea of there is a field, right, that is developed, this climate that includes things just beyond our biology, but then our biology or our wiring is developing within this climate. So if we think about the climate is this biofield and all aspects of our being, the more the greater our relationship with ourselves and all aspects of ourselves, the easier it's going to be for us, the more available we're going to be to the other for those aspects of them.
So the more I've kind of danced with my own inner devils and angels, the more I've opened to them, to simplify it, the more when I see this in the other, I won't be horrified or run in the other direction, or I might, but I can hold room for all of that because I've seen it in myself.
Yeah. And it's not so much even that we need, I need to have that. Mm-hmm. It's, I can be open to this.
Wow. Yeah.
Without
shutting down.
Yeah. And without shutting down or getting chaotic, where we have to sort of move off the thing that we're coming in contact with. And so we can we talk about staying on the spot, being able to stay open. And as you know, we've worked with this a lot, is this, it's not about the practitioner or the mentor saying, okay, I'm going to hold you on the spot and you're going to stay there and you're going to wriggle and I'm going to hold you there against your will. It's really about how do we create this environment where we can even know what the spot is?
You know, for the listeners, I'll give a personal example vaguely. So the other day, I'm feeling angry about something. And rather than just being like, oh, I'm feeling angry, here's what I do sometimes, because I'm a spiritual practitioner, which we'll get into this later. But like, I'm like, oh, anger? No, 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 no. Oh, slip off of that and go somewhere where I feel my ego feels more comfortable in the fear or the victimhood. I'm not going to stay with this really bad thing that I've deemed bad and I call it anger, but it doesn't go away. And so now I've got anger, I've got the side note of fear, and now on top of it, I have shame because the emotions are still there. And so by the time I get to you, I've got like a multi-layered sandwich of feelings that we kind of have to dig through to get to the root, which is the one that, just for our listeners, we call that's the spot. Like it's the emotion or the sensation or both, right? That I've been unconsciously often, right? That's why a teacher or a mentor, or a therapist is so valuable, because I didn't even know that I'm running from that. And then I'll come and tell you, and you'll be like, okay, let's take a left in that direction. And I'll be like, no, 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 no. Let's go to fear, because that's the one that really bothers me. And you're like, no, 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 go to anger. I'm like, no, no, no. Right. And so when I finally go to anger and I just give myself room to be in it for a moment, it's incredible how it releases so much, right? Like there's just this kind of secondary flood of compassion sometimes, right? That moves. So just to give listeners the idea of the spot. What is the spot?
Right. I mean, that's exactly it, right? Is we often finding what the spot is actually a really big part of our work, I think, within ourselves, as well as right in the healing relationship, is just even be able to be finding what that place is. And like you described so well, is how on our own sometimes we have certain habits of how we kind of wriggle away from the thing that is uncomfortable for us. It is not how we want to see ourselves. It's not how we want to experience ourselves. It's something that feels too bad for us, or overwhelming, or not in congruence with our idea of who we are or want to be. And so then we end up we kind of wriggle off into all these estuaries that tend to make it even harder to find what's going on. Yeah. And then we're off in this estuary over here. And then we're like, okay, I need to really work on this thing. I need to really work on how this thing keeps happening to me, and I feel really put upon about it. And I feel really stuck about it. And then as we explore even, okay, what's that part like? What's it like to feel put upon and, this, a sense of misfortune in our own experience. And as we go, okay, that's part of what's happening, we open to that, then we tend to then get a little closer to what sent us off in that direction. But so it's not even so much always as going, okay, we have to move off that and let's get back on the spot. It's like, okay, this is this reaction to something that is really uncomfortable for me, or feels like I don't know what to do with it. It's overwhelming. I don't feel like I have confidence that I can process this. And of course, this is all unconscious. We're not actively doing that and choosing to go off in another direction. It's a reflexive moving off of something into something else. And then we get a bit caught in the something else. And then the map of what's going on, it's harder to find what we're actually trying to get away from. And once we start to get a sense of what we're trying to get away from, we can connect a bit more with, I'm trying to get away from this because this is really hard and this is really scary, or this feels like something I just cannot open to. And so that's where, without the compassion and without that just real openness, non-judgmental holding, it's impossible. We can't start to open to what it is, because first we need to open to how hard it is for us to open to it.
Open to that.
Yeah. Like this, instead of, okay, now we're going to force ourselves onto being in relationship to the thing that feels so terrifying. It's like, first we have to have this gentleness with, I don't want to go anywhere near that thing. That's too scary for me. And because of that, I'm going to jump off into like a more like being defended against it, or, you know, the ways we have to then lose some connection to ourselves and what's really going on, as a way to manage and cope with how hard some of these things are. And that's why it's not this militant approach where it doesn't help us to try to force ourselves through the really hard feeling or the really difficult, scary thing that all we want to do is just get away from. We first have to be supported in the compassion for how difficult it is and how much we really do want to run away. And then through that, through connecting with that, the irony is then we start to develop a connection to ourselves. And it's the connection to ourselves that allows us to then start to be able to open to the things that we don't want to open to, that we want to put over on the side. And then that creates compartmentalization in us, or things that have to be shoved into this more unconscious, you know, kind of place in us, where then not only do we lose contact with that experience or that feeling, but we're losing contact with ourselves. It's like this blind spot for us that then tends to express itself in all the things, you know, all the reactivity or feeling disconnected. So it's really this coming into relationship with ourselves, but in a very gentle way, by not leaving anything out, especially how we're relating to the things that are hard for us.
Yeah, I'm amazed at the way that I still have so many uncomfortable feelings. But what I have gotten, and you know, you've helped me see like I'm thinking of so many things to kind of guide us, but one of the principles of Tantra is that be sure, you know, I think it was Dr. Svoboda that said, be sure that you're attempting to live with reality. Otherwise, reality eventually will come to live with you. And so much of our work together has been just you giving me endless permission to be real, like to speak actual truth, to be in the reality of me, and to feel that there is a capacity in me to hold it. And so I get anxious, I get scared, I feel lonely, I do feel angry, my least favorite feeling, you know, but I'm getting more and more what I feel is real self-esteem, that I can hold it. Like, oh, and strangely, and I think you probably resonate with this because I think we've talked about it, but it's like not fun. It feels like you're eating a shit sandwich, but eventually you're kind of like, oh, goody, a new thing that I get to be with, because if I can just stay with it, I know that something is there for me. There is something there, you know, that there is often an insight or a dawning of awareness or clarity. And guys, I've been working really hard. Okay. And what I'll tell you is compassion flows naturally once I'm sort of on the other side of some of these things, of confusion, of resistance, and hatred, or, you know, lots of these blocks. Ironically, when you just let them be a part of the story, not you sometimes say to me, bring your awareness to it and let the awareness be the light that shines through it, not busting it up and getting rid of it. And I think that I feel like I have more and more access to a continued sense of who I am that has absolutely nothing to do with my persona, the role I play in the world or whatever books I write or relationships I have, but this witness, this like consciousness that can just be kind to me. And that is a very sacred place for me.
Yeah. Yeah. This is, to me, really the crux of this climate. We are finding our way to, and I think there's a way that we don't necessarily know what it is or know what it's going to feel like, but when we're in this, we know it.
Yeah.
There's a very unique, in a way, kind of palpable experience of this, almost the presence of what we're describing, that is very different than relating to our difficulties in a mechanical way where we decide cognitively what we want to be and not be, and what we think is supposed to change in the way we think it's supposed to change. And that a lot of times is about this constructed idea of who we've made ourselves into, as opposed to this connection to this more alive, emergent,
mysterious.
Yeah. And like we're talking about this sense of reality, and there's something that really happens as we slowly make the journey from the idea about who we are and who or what we're supposed to be, or what we think we're working on, or what we think our life is, and we come into this direct relationship with reality inside of ourselves and around us. You can feel the atmosphere change.
Yeah. I want everyone to really get what we're saying in the sense of how radical what we're putting out there is. And what in Shakti school, sometimes I call the feminine form, which it's not masculine or feminine. It's just this field through which, specifically in talking about Ayurveda, for example, because a lot of our listeners are from that field, there's so many freaking rules and guides and regulations and practices and breathworks and mantras and mudras. There's so many. And how cool, right? Like Chinese medicine, tantric medicine, Taoist medicine, all these different traditions. But when we lose this central thing that you're talking about, I've seen it over and over in myself. I see it in my students. It leads to more of the same. It leads to actually more imbalance. Like Ayurveda is a language of archetype, it's a map. And people are like trying to I make a joke, like people are trying to go see Paris by walking on the map, right? That they miss the beauty and grandeur of the city because we're obsessed with the map. But our whole culture is set up like that. And certainly in the wellness world of social media, we're being bombarded with all of this, some of it really cool, right? And emergent, like attachment theory, the nervous system, trauma regulation, somatics, all these great, cool things that I've benefited so much from, but we're being bombarded with it in a way that worries me. And one of the reasons I want to have you regularly on the show is that it misses this central point. it creates yet another way in which we can have a me identification tool and an identity, and even in many cases, like a new ego structure to cling on to, that we miss this thing of not needing to be fixed in a particular way, that ironically does make you feel quite a bit better in general, right? So yeah, I don't know if there's a question in there, but I think it would be kind of cool to talk about the role of just how you see our culture, and you've said to me this idea of spiritual materialism, and maybe that could be a part of it, but there's this sense of wanting to attain something from our session or our yoga practice or our meditation. Like I've worked with that a lot with you lately, where it's like, dude, I've done all this work. Like my life should look like this now, or I should not have to deal with that anymore. And you've introduced me to this term, spiritual materialism. It's like, no, just because you do these practices, there's no guarantees of some sort of bonbons and unicorns, rainbowsville that our ego can kind of set up a structure for. So I don't know if you want to say some more on that.
Well, I think the crux of this, or where we can get a bit stuck, is when we are judging ourselves and our life and the things that are happening against the idea of what we think it should be. And we come up wanting, and that gap between, then we get a bit caught on what the gap between our direct experience and what we want it to be. And it's that incongruence that we get a bit fixated on, which is, I think it's part of what you're talking about, that we get a bit stuck in this outcome that we're hoping for, or these benchmarks that we set up that are ways to let us know
We're doing good.
Yeah, that we are moving along, that we are getting fixed, that we are improving. And if we're improving, it's being able to have these barometers that we've usually set up that are part of this idea about what it would be to be successful, what it would be to be healed, what it would be to have the life that we think we are supposed to have, that would be the reflection of our own well-being, or our own goodness, or our worth, or our value, or whatever the thing is that we feel like we're trying to get to, that validation of what is happening inside. And we could get a bit confused by those benchmarks being the sign of something internal.
That's really, really good. You've said to me, there's this subtle form of self-aggression when we are wanting ourselves, and it can be really subtle, but we're wanting ourselves and or our lives to be what they're not. And I mean, if we're really being honest, that's just such a part, I think, of so many of our internal experiences, is this constant future projection and hope for this different thing that it sounds like such a trite, spiritual, obvious ideal, but to actually be living in the moment and not being in a subtle state of aggression, be it fear, anger, joy, cleaning my dog's poop, right? And just getting out of that subtle self-aggression.
Well, and I don't think we see it that way. It's very,
That's hard to see.
it's very seductive and it makes sense. It's very reasonable, I think, or it feels very reasonable when it's happening inside that, we should be making our way towards certain things, whether they are certain spiritual states or psychological or emotional states of well-being, or certain kinds of success in our relationship or in our work, or our
Finances.
Our image in the world. There's so many ways that we can be wanting our practice, whether it's our spiritual practice or our healing or therapeutic practice, to be heading us towards these attainment of something, even if it's seems as reasonable as a certain inner state. And the challenge with that is we're then in a way getting caught in the same vice grip that we were describing in the beginning, where
right, like labeling things good and bad.
Well, yeah, but this a little bit more insidious, right? Which is the sense of certain things in me are desirable and certain things are undesirable, and certain states are I want to move towards and I want to cultivate more of those, and other states I want to avoid. And again, it's not so conscious as that, but it's a very reflexive thing that happens, where we reflexively are moving off of things that don't really line up with who we want to be or think we should be. And in that is this relationship with ourselves where we're in a lot of conflict and always trying to mold ourselves to be something that is going to fit this idea of what we hope to be. And through that, we really are reinforcing this this lack of openness to the parts of us that don't line up with that don't feel like they're going to get us somewhere. And so there's it creates more and more of these sort of gaps in connection with aspects of who we are, or certain ways we experience things. So it does take us a bit further away from that personal honesty, where we can be in relationship with what's there instead of having to be reflexively moving off it because we're like in pursuit of something that's going to move us toward the goal of what we want. So if we're looking at the value or orientation of the openness to what's here and being able to start being in more relationship with all that we do experience inside as the path of development itself, and as the path of developing more openness, compassion, and wisdom for ourselves, but also for what other people are going through, then there's a bit of a reorientation. And it's not as though any of these things are bad or wrong. It's that the way we try to shape ourselves to move ourselves into the person we think we need to be, in order to make our way to some of these things or some of these states, just inherent in that we are trying to get rid of certain things that are going to tend to still be there, the more we can really open to all of that and have a relationship with more and more of the aspects of what we experience or who we are, that's really the place where we cultivate a lot more understanding too.
Of what
Instead,
those
we
things
want to,
and of what those things even are, right? Like, oh, this anger, oh, this fear, oh, this aspect of me that I don't like. When we really, there's a paradox I always feel, where it's like the thing that the thing that I've been running from isn't what I thought it was. And often there can be an insight as to where it comes from, and it converts itself into, in my mind or my psyche, into sort of a new ally, to use a word. But like these things that I've hated had a reason for being, and that's why I think it's so important in a mentorship that may be of goodness and service, and in success. I think there's a deep importance in the individual journey. And we were speaking about the podcast yesterday, and there's a word in Sanskrit I love called sahaja, and it means like the spontaneousness of the healing. And because I also know that a lot of our Shakti school students will listen to this, Krishnamacharya talked about it too, that the relationship one-on-one is what it's all about. And that there isn't a one-size-fits-all system or approach really at the end of the day for anyone. And what I've really loved in working with you, and what I even more than ever really try to instill in what we do at our school, is that the primacy of that individual spontaneous experience, the healing properties emerging from the person themselves. And that's what's been revolutionary about my work with you. And I get excited because I'm like, oh my God, Crystal, you're teaching me this tantra, the essence of the tantra that I've been studying for so long. Like, it's actually finally happening. But what's so cool, guys, is like, it's happening through my own mind and body. You're not like implanting anything in me or telling me to necessarily do anything. These healing resources start to come out of my own experience, whether it's our sessions together or later in a dream or meditation. And when that happens, like, no one can take that from me, and no one, I don't need any convincing. It's like, it's so personal and yet so incredibly human and universal, and even beyond human. And so maybe just speaking to that, like the real importance of the individual relationship one-on-one, but also if there are therapists or people who want to be mentors or coaches or people working with mentors, that individual's experience being of really great value. And I think that's where people get tripped up, because you and I spoke about this yesterday, where it was like, just because someone had a great experience with this technique and then they start ramming it down the throats of everyone, maybe with good intentions, like, it doesn't mean it's going to be right for everyone, nor will it be right for everyone all the time. And maybe it will be not great for everyone. So maybe speaking to how you see that.
Yeah, well, there's a lot in there that you just were, speaking to, and it does go back to what we were saying, right? Is that if we're orienting, as the practitioner, the person in the healing role, if we're really orienting to the person we're working with from a place of, we're not trying to change them into something else or really impose something on them, but we're creating an environment where they can open more to themselves, and connect more and more to what's really there, who they really are. Because when we've got this orientation, either as the practitioner or as the person who is in the role of the student or the client, that we're trying to, like, we have this agenda of what we think is supposed to happen or how we think the development is supposed to go, we can actually miss what's trying to unfold from within. And so this climate of openness, this climate of actually wanting to see and understand instead of molding and shaping in a way that where that becomes overarching, or that starts to become stifling, where we've got our idea of what we think is either supposed to happen, or the tool we think, we're wanting to use, as opposed to really supporting, what's, this emergence for the person, because that's where all those resources are. They're actually, if we think of those resources become more and more of those unique resources, they're unique to the person in a way, become more and more available, the more connected one becomes to, especially to the parts of them that they're moving off of or moving away from, or vilifying in some way and trying to jump over. It's actually through the reconnection where that creates this beginning of a bridge to these larger resources that like we're saying, is very unique to the person. However, when we're in our mind, what we're going to shape it, we're going to make it, we're on our own molding and changing ourselves based on our idea of who we're going to become, and we're going to use this tool mechanically to become. What happens is we lose contact with the place of struggle, because we're in our, we're orchestrating all things in this way from a very limited, very sort of limited part of the mind. And so as we come into contact with the places that, the places of struggle where we do actually get overwhelmed, we don't know what to do with it, we are kind of out of ideas, or we don't know how to fix or change it, that's this very potent place to be. Because in that place, that asks us to actually open to support that is beyond what we can perceive as how we make our way through this. And that opens the door for that perfect resource to start to come in and be the match and the bridge through us into connection with, it's like that perfect support for the thing that is beyond what we know what to do with.
It makes me think of this very common practice in the world I've run in the past 2 decades. And like, there's all this talk about the goddesses, right? And the goddess this, the goddess that, the goddess is very popular, right? Amongst this certain sector. And you read these things, and I've even, been a part of this, where it's like, for propitiating Lakshmi, meditate on this, this, and this, put this out, visualize her, chant this mantra to become like Durga, right? And you can read books where it sort of outlines their qualities, and that's great. Like, it's sort of describing an archetype in a way, but there's this real sense of greediness around wanting, which goddess, like, am I going to pick out of my goddess box today, and propitiating her. In a way, it's so sort of the opposite of what you're saying. And I'm not making that bad or wrong. I've totally done that and been very, very curious about that. But there's a real different experience when you are willing to be with these neglected or unwanted aspects of yourself, and you ask for support to show up. And all of a sudden, I've had that experience of so much white light and just feeling this gaze of what can only be described as a divine mothering presence that just has this way of being able to continually look at my darkness with no problem. Like there's nothing wrong here. And I love you. And I felt this presence. For me, it was the white Tara. And that is and she will always be with me. And it's not, and that's a very different experience than going and trying to find her through a book or a YouTube or a practice. And so I just wanted to kind of give an example of like a resource. And I've had other moments where it's an image of Jesus with these little lambs. And I had a Bible when I was a little girl that was the picture, right? And so it was so personal. And yet it was Christ, this universal archetype. And I could go on and on. I've had nature things come to me in dreams. And you and I have worked with nature, the ocean being a big one. And that is very different than the cognitive, egoic, sort of logical desire to have a resource that I pick and choose. Would you agree?
Well, I think it, in a way, they can be helpful in different ways and in different phases or stages of our development.
I see.
So just to know these energies exist, and these deities, these supports, these or archetypes are there, can be a way to kind of open a bit to the universal qualities, right? Just the idea of resource, right?
There's nothing wrong with asking Jesus, please be with me.
Yeah, and there'll be certain certain sacred supports that we feel an affinity for. And if we can have that as sort of the poo-poo platter of like, oh, I want, we go to
the goddess smorgasbord.
And we're like, I like her. That one looks really tasty. And oh, this one looks really tasty. And we choose it based on, that first, sense of the goodies in a way, which is fine, but it's sort of one certain stage of this that is an exploration in what are we drawn to, right? And then I think as we go further along, there can also then be what we're talking about and what you're talking about, which is the deeper our relationship with ourselves, the deeper our connection to the parts of us that are not as, the places that we struggle. That can actually, if we're not just trying to jump over it and fix it by installing the right goddess
energy
in order to counteract it, but instead we're coming into relationship with this energy in us. And through that, the necessary balancing energy begins to arrive. And so that's a very different way of saying, okay, these are all parts of they can all be parts of the developmental process. And this piece we're describing, where we can become more and more open, allows for something to come in and start to be, it's like more resource can start to become available to us as we open, without as much preconceived notion of what we think that openness is supposed to look like, what we think our development is supposed to look like, what we think we're trying to become. A lot of those ideas often have roots in our conditioning and in our trauma, or in our how we would want to change ourselves, the things we want to be and the things we don't want to be. We're going to kind of pick and choose, which is it's a fine starting point. And hopefully we can also start moving towards this openness, so that that perfect match for the thing we're working with can start to show up. It's that's why being in touch with it is so, that's why being in touch with the thing that comes back to being on the spot.
On the spot.
Everything is like, you're talking about like the ways we move off the spot in these ideas about ourselves, even ideas about our spiritual practice. And that's all part of what happens, right? But as we notice, oh, wow, I'm doing that thing, I'm moving off. So the more support we get and the more able we become to become more and more in relationship with being more on the spot, being in relationship with what's there, and the more open we are to that, what happens, that openness creates an openness to the resource that is the match, not to get rid of or eradicate the thing that we're don't want or are struggling with, or that's hard for us, but it's the perfect match to shine that illumination into and through, so that our relationship with what we're struggling with can start to shift.
Wow.
And that's how we develop more openness, is we have that direct experience. And then we go, oh, okay, this feels really different than I'm going to try to fix this, or I'm trying to change this, or change myself, or, you know, pick this goddess because I'm going to be like her instead of like what I don't want to be. And then we're, you know, we can start to feel, how does this feel different? And until we have that direct experience, it's sort of like, how would we have a reference for anything other than just trying to make ourselves better and into what we hope we might be, that looks good for us, that looks good to us, that's going to be more reflexive, that's going to be more natural for a lot of us. So this reorientation it makes sense we wouldn't start from there.
You know, in my former life as a tantrika, I was really into the whole manifestation technology, and, you know, a lot of it's really cool. And I don't mean to say it's not, you know, but now the more I work with you and the more first of all, I got a puppy. So my meditation's not even the same, right? Like, and that would have freaked me out so bad, you know, 4 years ago, but there's a way that like the meditation runs through everything. And that's very tantric, by the way. But the other piece is the manifestation. For me, the whole field has shifted. I'm okay now saying that I don't know with my conscious prefrontal, logical, very intellectual cortex. Like, I have no idea what I need to be manifesting for myself, because so much of the manifestation has come from what you said, like this place of feeling less than and better than and traumatized and, you know, relationally unmet. And as that begins to slowly shift, the hubris has melted, I hope, around, I don't want to ask for X, because that would be coming from this place. I want to allow what would really be coming from the highest self, what really was becoming from, in Tantra, we call it the deepest driving desire of the heart, not these lesser desires that are coming from my place of please validate me world, you know? And so I think it shifts the whole conversation around manifestation. And you know, it's just a function also of maturing. Like, I hear these younger women talking about manifesting their dreams, and I'm like, oh, it would be so much better to just kind of hold that room of being on the spot, and then trusting that the relationship, if it's for me, will come, the money, the job, the friendships, the teacher, right? And I think that I also want to talk before we end about students, people out there listening, I'm sure, like, oh my God, like, how can I find this mentorship myself? But maybe just taking a moment, Crystal, to talk about this idea of manifestation, because it's a huge buzzword.
Right. And it's like you said, the place where this shift begins exactly what you're describing. When we notice ourselves going, oh, wow, my intention for my manifestation is actually coming from this place of fear, anxiety, insecurity,
Lonely.
loneliness. And that's actually underneath, that's driving this whole manifestation intention or process. So there's a lot of like neurosis that is the undercurrent. And when and that's, I think, a very normal thing, because we figure out, I want this thing and I want this thing because I'm really scared of what that means if I don't have it, or I feel insecure, or I feel incomplete. And there's some anxiety usually running in the background, and we're like, okay, I've got this deep anxiety about this, or a deep sadness about this, or this terrible loneliness, whatever the thing is, that we're like, okay, so I'm going to do a kind of work on manifestation, but it's from this platform.
Right.
And that's normal. Like, of course, we're going to start there. We're going to be like, how do I improve my life? Because I'm really freaked out. I'm scared.
We all do those things, guys.
Right. And that's, I think, what's so important is when we start to catch the intention underneath the manifestation, and how there's this neurosis that we are then building our sort of spiritual manifestation practice on. Once we catch that, that's a really important moment, because that then allows us to see our fear, that starts to see our neurosis, and how we're using spirituality to try to help us out of that hole, because we don't think we can handle it, because we're afraid. It's like, oh my gosh, I really can't handle this, what's there, so I need to
Build up
something else in spiritually, so I can actually escape this thing in my life, or this experience, and make it into something else. And so once we start to actually see the setup, that's a really amazing opening moment. And that allows us to both then come back into relationship with this, what's been underneath our manifestation intention. And then that starts to soften and loosen, because we start working directly with it. Then our manifestation practice can change, it can transform, and we can be more in a place of actual connection to the divine, to what is actually in alignment, and what's best for us in our path and our development. And that's very different than, I'm wanting to launch into manifestation from this intention of trying to get away from, get rid of, or become something else, because I want to get away from this bad feeling I have, or this thing I'm scared of happening or not happening in my life. So it actually, this allows us to get in touch with something that usually is so core for us, that we're so worried about, that we struggle with, that we don't think we can handle. Once we open to that, and we start to feel a sense of the resource actually coming in, where it's not as over, it might be still scary, but okay, I can meet this, I can be with this. This opens the terrain where that doesn't now need to be where we're trying to drive our life from, or drive our spiritual practice from, or drive our manifestation from. This opens up a much larger landscape of what's possible, that's a lot more in tune and in touch and in alignment with our soul and our purpose, and what is actually good for us on our path. And the truth is, a lot of times we don't always come in knowing. We have an idea, but the idea is based on a lot of fear. It's not as much based on this, like, we can actually move towards what's good for us and open to that and let that start to come in when we're not so caught up in the fear that makes us want to really control our situation. And this is a very challenging thing to start to work with. And it's very nuanced, because how do we be open to what's best for us? How do we open to what's really good for us in our development? That's pretty scary, to take the hands off the wheel and have some sense of trust in the goodness.
That there is a golden thread that is guiding our lives, that there's some sort of high self that has a plan for us that we can lean into and trust. That's been one of the biggest, like, are we in trust with that or not? And if we are, we can trust when we're single, we can trust when we're married, we can trust when we have a teacher, we can trust when we don't. I think there's just so much more room for each sort of stage of life being a part of what you call this, like, mandala, this sacred mandala of our life. And I really, in this lifetime, know that I want freedom from a lot of these karmic binds. And I remember you saying to me, okay, be careful, because by asking for that, like, we do have to do a certain amount of shadow work and drudging through in some ways. But the end result is there is like a bigger sense of freedom, that there's nothing wrong with wanting good things. I hope everyone out there, of course, we want comforts and good things to come into our life, but there's the sense in me more and more of like, there's more room or freedom for all the things to be in the life, rather than wanting to manifest this one specific movie that I had thought that I wanted.
Yeah, and I think what we realize when we come into contact with that idea we have, that's important. It's not like, okay, get rid of that idea and just be open. It's like, okay, here, and I have a very specific notion, and a lot of times a very fixated idea of this, like you said, the movie, of how it's supposed to be. And how do I just keep spinning my wheels to try to get that to happen, and then feel upset or distressed or like I'm failing if it's not happening that way. And we don't really realize we're doing that. We just think it's reasonable. It feels very reasonable, of course. And it's not that it's unreasonable. It's that we oftentimes don't realize that this is even happening. We just think this is what
Humans do.
Well, we have this idea about things that feels very true. And so to actually start to allow it to be a bit more deconstructed by seeing how much we want it, and what are the feelings underneath the how much we want it, what's underneath there, right? What's driving that? That allows us to come even more into relationship with our motivation, and a lot of times with what the ways we want to be different than we are, which allow us to then come into greater relationship with, well, who we actually are, and can we be with that? And then through that starts to open up the terrain for more actual possibilities for our development, and the road ceases to be so fixed, narrow, and there starts to be a bit more flexibility and a bit more loosening, and our mind starts to open a bit more. And that really helps us. And it's not so much about then, it becomes even less about, okay, we have to make the thing happen, to, while my mind is a lot more open, there's a lot more flexibility. And through that, we feel a lot more connected to the richness of what is actually in our life now.
Exactly.
And build confidence in our ability to handle and be with what's happening. And when that is more available, there tends to be this openness to the unfolding of our path, that it actually comes out of more openness and satisfaction with what's here now, and to really see the richness of ourselves, the richness of what's in this moment. That actually creates this atmosphere of richness that then opens up to what lies ahead. We start to relate to our life in this way, and through that, like, that starts to build. And then it's not as much as what needs to happen as this experience of richness that we're having, where we're not missing it. And that creates this climate we described in the beginning. I feel it as we're talking about it. It's that palpable climate that we then step into. And that's actually the ground from which things develop.
It makes me think of that classic Bible verse that's very tantric: seek ye first the kingdom of God and everything else will be added unto you. And people may not like the word God, but like it's that idea of being in this richness of now makes this sort of spiritual portal of the soul more available to be able to actually receive.
And it builds energy. You can feel when we're in contact with that, there's a way that there actually is this building of energy. And it's almost like a collecting of energy starts to happen. And that in of itself starts to build what happens next. It's like what happens next comes from that, but we need to kind of, there's a collecting and building of energy that does start to make that possible. And this is a very, very direct relationship to energy, which is very different than the relationship to our projected image or thought of what we want our life to be, which can often serve to just distress us and make us feel more unhappy about things. And that whole state of being in energy does not generate more. That doesn't generate the path ahead. It just keeps us actually losing more and more energy. So we don't get to actually collect and work directly with energy that can move things forward, if that makes sense. So it's such a paradox.
Yeah. I mean, it really is a paradox. The less you want it, the more, it's like that Taoist Zen place of being actually with reality as the place from which all things can come. And if we're in this projection of some sort of idea about what we want our life to be like, we're never actually at in the actual point of manifestation.
Well, what we experience when we do that, because we're all going to do that. We're all going to get caught in our fantasy and our angst about it, or our neurosis about it, or our fear about it, or longing, whatnot. We can feel when we're in that mode and start to go, okay, what does this feel like? What do I notice when this is happening? How do I experience
urgency culture?
Well, yeah. And what's going on energetically? How do I then experience myself energetically?
Wow.
And instead of being like, oh, don't do that, that's wrong, we shouldn't do that. It's like, no, actually really notice this, because this helps us understand what's happening in the mind and what's happening energetically. And then what happens is we then are able to gently not vilify that either, but notice that can happen. And this is that's the outcome. That's how then I feel, what happens in me energetically, what happens in my mind, how does that affect my state, right? And then what happens is we can start to also, without getting rid of that, we can see it, and then we can start making the journey to this place of openness within us, where we can start to settle down, we can start to open to the divine, we can start to open to ourselves, and there can be this gathering that starts to happen. We can start being in relationship with energy. This is what
everyone listening, this is why we're going to have Crystal back, and this is why we're also going to do a course with her, and this is why we're going to give her a website. And I feel like there's so many directions that I want to go in, but I want to give a teeny tiny example of this in our experience together for the listeners to kind of make it really real. I mean, this can get really subtle, and I think it's cool to really, I mean, first of all, when I'm in that place of opening to the divine and opening to me, there's this sense of gratitude, not like for everything feels really good, but it's like, oh, I'm back home. Like I'm back home. I'm in a place of trust. I'm in a place of gratitude for what I have already been given, which is immense, right? And then from there, it's like the real intention can be known. And for me, it's, you know, it's so clear once I do that process of what you said, of opening to divine, opening to myself, whatever color I'm bringing to the moment. And then I can check in with the intention. Because one time in one of our sessions, guys, there's a phrase that I wanted to bring into this, which is the phrase adhikara, which is a Sanskrit phrase which means to be honed or to be made ready for. And I feel like I've done a lot to get to the place of being able to be ready for our relationship. And sometimes it's hard. And those are usually the best moments ever later on down the road. And I'll look back and be like, thank you so much, Crystal, for inviting me to look at reality. And it is not fun sometimes. Like, I don't want to candy coat it, but there's so much compassion in you and there's so much trust in me towards you. After 5 years, I'll go kicking and screaming, but I'll go. And, you know, we laugh sometimes, right? Because you're like, oh, but one of those moments you were like, I get teary because it's just so cool the way that like all this shit that I've been running from, you can see, and you're just like, hey, there's something to look at. And I'm like, no, not that. And you're like, yeah, you can do it. Come on, let's look at it. And when I finally do, and I just let that be a part of like the garden of love, oh my God, there's so much more freedom. And one of these occasions I'll share with the listeners, because I don't think it's too personal. I was sending a text to a guy and I was like telling you about how annoyed I was that like, oh, he's leading me on, he's not writing me back, blah, blah, blah. And I don't even remember the details. Honestly, I don't even remember his name, but like, you were like, what was your intention when you sent that particular text? And I was like, oh, okay, if I really feel into what sent the text, what launched the text? And I think this is such a cool place for us to look. It was like, I had just gotten to a hotel. I was lonely. I was wishing that I had a husband who was checking in if my flight landed and I got to my hotel, but I didn't, right? I was feeling sad and lonely. And I was pissed off that this guy, you know, man, what a ton of pressure to place on this total stranger, but none of this was conscious. But when I really sat with what was the inherent thing that I was looking to sort of, you use this word, like a sorceress craft in the world. I was like, damn, I'm doing sorcery, you know, and we all do it. It's this way of wanting to manipulate reality to do my bidding because I'm hurting or I'm lonely or I'm scared. And then you said, well, what would the text, or maybe I did, I don't remember, but it was like, well, what would the text look like if you were dropped into this place of being totally connected to the divine and totally connected to yourself? It was a completely different text. And when I sent it, there was absolutely no need in me for him to even write me back, right? Like, it was like, there's a way that we're kind of clearing these karmic entanglements that are so easy to get wrapped into.
Well, and I think that, you know, what you're describing, right? What we're talking about is when we are, you know, this idea of manipulating reality to do our bidding, this comes from a place of our neurosis. It comes from a place of the things we feel like we can't handle in ourselves. Like, I can't handle this feeling or this experience. And so I'm going to, you know, that gets projected out into the world. And then let me adjust that to make myself more comfortable so I don't have to feel this thing. And we think that, I mean, of course, like, we have to do what we have to do to cope, right? Of course, there's no, you know, it's not to say that that's not, like, we never are supposed to do that. However, we're talking about it on this level of when we're really wanting to work with our energy and work with our mind and really uncover what's going on. When we see this mechanism that we create, and that we see that underneath it is not this intention to have a lovely experience and to actually manifest a good life. It's actually, I'm really uncomfortable and I don't want to feel this thing. And so how can I move off of it and, get the environment to support me in that. And what that does each time we do that, not that it's bad or wrong or to make it like, oh, don't ever do that. But when we do that, we're strengthening our belief that we can't handle what's happening and we can't handle what we're feeling. And of course, as we need to bring in ways, aspects of support that allow us to be with what's happening and it not being overwhelming for us. So there's this combination of building enough resource, internal, external, but with the goal of that's helping us to open to what's there, as opposed to let me change the scenario so I'm actually moving off of the feeling and I have less contact with it. That reinforces that this feeling that we don't have confidence in ourselves, that we can't handle what's happening. And that lets us know something in there is really scary for us. Something feels like too much. So it's not about vilifying ourselves and like, don't do that. Just sit there and feel the bad feeling, but to start to see what scares us and what overwhelms us is really helpful, and not just getting caught in our idea of making it a prettier scenario. And then that becomes the fixation, because then we lose contact with what's really going on. And that's the on the spot thing, right? So it's not even like get on the spot, stay on the spot and torture yourself.
Yeah.
It's, I'm moving off the spot right now, and I'm going to use this text or this, whatever the thing is, to get off the spot. It's not like slap your hand and stop doing it. It's
aware.
Oh, here, I'm actually moving off of something because it's scaring me and I don't think I can handle it. So it's being able to see what's happening. And this is that level of deep personal honesty with ourselves, where we're not hard on ourselves about it, but we start to come into relationship with, we can be like, really, oh yeah, honey, you're really feeling lonely right now. Oh yeah, this is loneliness. It's really okay that you want to reach out and text someone and get some attention, or kind of like sort of squirm off of the feeling. That's okay too. And you're really scared right now. So what support do we need, that I don't have to run from this and do a reactive pattern or do the thing I always do? How can I come a little more into relationship with something that I've always been so reflexively scared of or overwhelmed by, that I hop off right away? What do I need to help me be in this gap a little bit more? Because what's in the gap, what's in the place between the feeling and the action, that's where all the material is. That's where all the stuff is. And so we want to create this place of openness so we can actually start working with what's in there. It's actually where it all is.
The material and the unknown resources.
That's exactly right.
So we should probably keep this to 2 hours. This is the longest podcast we've ever done, but I knew it would be.
Getting there.
So I think as the last question, I know the students and listeners out there are thinking, wow, I would really like to have a special mentor in my life, or a therapist or a teacher. And obviously we're going to put your link in the show notes, and Crystal's going to have a new website, maybe, that we hope, and some beautiful meditations and resources for you guys. So obviously she's my recommendation for working with someone one-on-one. But I mean, Crystal can't meet 100,000 people. So, and you're not for everyone, and that's okay, right? Like this is a personal thing. And so I'm just hearing the question out there, like, how do I find my mentor, and how do I know it's the right fit? And what if I haven't found my mentor and it's really hard?
This is not an easy question to answer. I wish I had a really easy answer, like, here's a directory and I'll send you there. And you just find them, there's this directory of all the perfect mentors that are just connected there.
Yeah. And let me just state this overtly, guys, Crystal is freaking exceptional. And you're going to get to know her more through the podcast and through Shakti school. But like, she's exceptional for one reason. And I feel like I have a deep authority in being able to speak to this, because I've been literally all over the planet searching for my teacher, all over. And the amazingness of, I even spent time living near you and watching your daily life. And I'm like, wow, I had to go all over Asia, all over Africa, all over Europe to come and find this Hawaiian surfer girl. You're not what I expected. You look nothing like what my younger self or my ego would have even conjured up, but to my credit, I was so open from day one to your wisdom. But what makes you exceptional, and it's not just to brag and throw flowers at you, it's to reveal something to the listener. And that is, you're so intelligent. Crystal was pre-med, you guys. She's a genius of the nervous system, of physiology. She was a Pilates teacher. Her knowledge of anatomy and physiology is unbelievable. It's not like you're just like this woo-woo energy woman, which she also is, and so to have this vast spectrum of Buddhism, Tantra, spirituality, and then the whole Western medicine and psychology. I mean, I did a PhD program for a semester and then dropped out, and Crystal knew all this stuff. Like, I was just like, is there anything this woman doesn't know about? And you bring all of that to the table. And to find someone that really has such a Renaissance span perspective is so challenging in our world today. People are so specialized. And because they're so specialized, they, without the intention, I mean, I've been guilty of this too. We find something that works and we think it's right for everybody, and we ram it down everyone's throat and think it's this one way. But I think the real healer has this capacity to dance on a number of different levels of the human experience, from the most subtle to the most sort of physiological. So that's just really rare. So I don't know if you have time to meet with everyone, but all that bragging to say, like, what do you recommend to people on who are listening out there, who are hungry for this type of one-on-one experience?
First, thank you for your very kind words. I'm very humbled by your praise and your description of me. So thank you. I think to know that what you described, I think, is so important, that we don't always know how it's going to come to us and what it's going to look like. And I think we spoke a bit of that in one of our conversations about, it's similar to what we've talked about today. We have a lot of times an idea, something that maybe fits our idea about who we think we should be or how we think we should grow. And that's not always what's in alignment for our development, right? So at the best, a relationship that is supporting us on our path is one that allows us to come into more contact with ourselves And this idea of the difference between imposing a system or an idea or a methodology or a technique onto us, and then the technique is what we're focused on, or the technique, the map of that technique or that process becomes the focal point, is quite different than the map of the person and their being what is in the foreground and the focal point. So that I think, not that we can't have great experiences with teachers or
And techniques can be awesome. I mean, I mean, just to
great.
be clear, like, you've given me lots and lots and lots of techniques, right?
Right, exactly. And I think the container of, the larger interest in understanding the person, and the techniques are, used to uniquely to support that person in that moment, but that the technique doesn't necessarily take precedence, at that we're molding ourselves and seeing ourselves through the lens of the technique.
Right.
But we're actually understanding the human condition and interested in that. And so I think that as the backdrop can create the environment through which there can be the relationship starts to become the greater presence than the technique.
Oh, okay. Can we just pause on that? The relationship begins to become the greater focus than the technique, or the greater important thing.
The greater presence, that there is something alive that is happening in the coming together, that somehow registers for us, that somehow lights up something in us, that feels like we are getting closer to some sense of truth within ourselves through the relationship, as opposed to we are like becoming like that person, or we are trying to mold into their view in some way,
Perfect their methodology.
Right? Which can all be it can be pieces. We can say, okay, we can take that and we can, use that system. But if we get lost in the system, as the system is, we're fitting ourselves into the system, as opposed to the systems helping us to understand, maybe have one map or one window into understanding ourselves and our person, but that we don't get lost in it. I think those are some things that we can look for. But like we're talking about, it's a feeling. It's that feeling climate that we're with someone and we feel a sense of, it's helping us to feel more in contact with ourselves in a way where we're opening more to what is, with the added dimensionality of there's something else being added in that makes that more doable for us, that makes it more possible for us to, it's like it supports and scaffolds us so we actually can step forward on our journey. And I think there's something very palpable when we feel, and you've talked about this before, you've reflected this to me, you said, I really know, like I'm where I'm supposed to be. And there's a feeling of that. And unfortunately, sometimes we have to go for long periods not, without that kind of container, without that kind of relationship. And I think those of us who find it, to me, it's a very fortunate gift when we find that. But the truth is, it's not always immediately available. But to connect with this wanting and longing and hope for that, in some ways, I think that's a starting point. I mean, I remember being, this is was in my early 20s, and I have this very distinct memory of being on a beach out on East Oahu and just praying and crying and like, where is my teacher? Please send me someone. Like, please, I need this. And just the desire for that, but also the angst of feeling alone in my journey. And it wasn't, someone did not appear for a while, and I had people along the way, that kind of offered certain pieces and were sort of placeholders in a way that gave me pieces that I needed to move forward on my journey. And then I was ready for that next teacher where I could actually choose someone that was gonna be more in alignment. It's like I think we choose a lot of times based on our trauma.
Yeah. No, I
And
agree.
yeah. So sometimes we have to kind of kiss a lot of frogs and really, I think try people out, see what it feels like. And someone that's kind of, it's like with parenting, the good enough parent is a good thing.
Yeah.
And
Like, I mean,
what we need.
I think that's important to say too. Like, I think what's been another two elements that of many that make our relationship powerful for me. One is that I feel more connected to me. I don't ever think, oh, I'm in the crystal methodology and I'm a senior student within the crystal methodology. Like, I feel like that's not even in my consciousness. It's like, and there's a real requirement for a longevity. I think there's this false idea, I'm going to have a couple somatic trauma release sessions and then I'm on my way. It's like, you and I have been working together a lot for years, and it doesn't feel like therapy in the sense of like I'm curing myself of my neuroses, although that is happening. But you're like the function of being in the room together, as you've said throughout this whole podcast, is why we're showing up to serve something bigger than the me and you. So like longevity and that being really empowering. But at the same time, I've gotten the luxury of like the old school method where back in the day, you would have to prove yourself ready to sit with your teacher, right? Like she would put you through a number of different tests to kind of see if you were ready. And like, you didn't do that to me, but like, I mean,
you had enough of your own. I didn't need more.
I didn't need any more. I mean, I came to you ripe, right? And thank you for not putting me through tests. But like, what's so cool and what I talk about in the book, and like, I'll just say it for everybody. I mean, I'm going to get emotional. I'm very attached to Crystal in a healthy way. Like the whole book is dedicated to you because the whole book was written during being in the healing field with you. And what was so cool about that is that you were like a regular ass woman. Like you have a bunny and you surf, and like you let me sit in your kitchen floor with you while you made coffee and food, and like you told me stories about your life and your struggles. And I felt like I was in the presence of someone that was so deeply connected to their humanity, but also knew all this crazy shit that I was getting to learn. And I think that's what has been so tantric and so powerful and so transformational, because it gave me permission to be the same, to be a human, and not this projection of what unfortunately we also place on teachers. I am a teacher and I'm both projected all my daddy and mommy issues on my teachers, but also I've been projected upon, and I know what it feels like on both ends of that. And just for everyone to start to admit that we're all human beings, and the good enough therapist and the good enough parent
has been a really beautiful understanding, but I think there's a turn now in therapy to kind of let the therapist be a human being and not just like Freud on the sofa. Like you don't even look at him, right? Like you turn away from the therapist, but like that you get to be a human has actually been so, so important in the divinity of the experience.
Yeah, I think it's such a personal journey that we're on in this life. And there's so many things that it's like the elements that come together in terms of our readiness, where we are in our journey, the timing of the intersection of the meeting between us and someone who is going to impact our life and who's going to walk with us. So I think the best thing we can do is be open and be ready and set our intention and ask.
I was going to say, the way I met you, for everyone out there listening, I wrote my friend Kimberly, who everyone knows in the podcast, she's been on a number of times. Hey, who do you recommend as a therapist? And she said your name. That's how I met. I think just, we've kind of talked about the bigger eagle eye vision, but like on a practical level, reaching out to some people in your life who may have had positive healing experiences with someone and just asking for their references, I think is a really good way to start.
Well, and also asking in the greater sense of asking in terms of, prayer. Right? Sit and to know that it's what we talked about earlier. It's like we're actually wanting to kind of gather in order to both become ready, to both recognize which direction to go and what to say yes to and what to step into deeper relationship with, as well as have enough energy accumulate to like draw these things to us. And so one practice that can be helpful for everything is to sit or stand and get grounded, connect to the earth, connect to your own energy and get quiet inside and ask for a teacher who's good for you. And then just sit with that ask and allow the energy of that desire to build. And as that builds, that will start to lead us in the direction we need to go.
The energy of the desire. I love that.
Well, and it's the energy of the question.
What's the question?
Who would be good for me?
Yeah, I was going to say, is it something like who would be like what we've spoken of before, that person or experience that would be good for my evolution of my soul? And that really could go for everything, not just a teacher. I'm thinking of myself, like partnership. Because what is the alternative? the alternative is that we draw in things that aren't good for the evolution of the soul. Like that to me is such a divine question, because
it takes us
we do the other thing all the time. I mean,
right, we're scared and we're worried, and which can also lead us to to a teacher as well, when we're struggling and we feel desperate and we're just like, okay, send me someone, help me. I mean, that's a great request too, right? That can be where this comes from. I mean, I relate to that as well, being in a place of just utter desperation of, I cannot fix this. I have no idea what to do. I am just struggling and in such darkness, and I'm in despair. Help. Please send someone. Help me find my way to someone who can help me.
Yeah. All right, everyone. As you can see, Crystal and I could keep going and going and going, but I think this at 2 hours, Crystal, I think this is a beautiful place to stop. I really do. Thank you so much for your time and taking your Sunday morning in Hawaii, when I know you'd rather be, or you could be surfing, to be on Spirit Sessions. And is there anything, I mean, we'll put your website. Is there anything you want to say or guide people towards as we start to close?
No, nothing. We had talked about, you had encouraged me to, specifically develop some offerings for folks who want to begin with some of these practices and some of this support, to create a bit of a foundation for folks with some of these supportive, regulating, connecting practices. And so I've got some of those that'll be available to folks, so we can create a link for that. Just some very simple meditations and practices that I found to be very, very helpful for me, for folks I work with. So working on
you guys, Crystal's going to create some amazing audio meditations. And I feel like I said Christmas has come early, because I really have been wanting these selfishly for myself. So I'm glad we're saying it here, because it means we're going to put it out there. And yeah, definitely check out those meditations. Thank you so much, Crystal, for being on Spirit Sessions.
You're welcome. I hope our conversation is of help to someone.
I'm sure it is. I have no doubts. Well, guys, thank you for your time. If you've made it through 2 hours, wow, you've really hung in there with us. I hope you made a cup of tea, and yeah, look forward to having Crystal back on the show soon. Thank you all. Have a beautiful day.
A big special thanks to Kevin Carlisle of Goodbye Gemini, who wrote this beautiful podcast music, and to DJ Juan Pablo Jimenez in southern Spain for mixing it and making it magic.